have been fighting for 400 years.
And your people too.
So I just want you to explain what you mean by that.
You know what I'm talking about. Y'all all know what I'm talking about, man. Don't sit up here and try to bait and not know what I'm talking about. Y'all know what the fuck I talk about when I say these things. Your people too.
Explain it. Not everybody knows what you're talking about.
Radio Raheem, I don't have to explain what's understood, man. You know what I mean by that. You know what I said by that. I ain't gotta go further. And if anybody don't understand that, then God be with them. Go look up the history. Go look up the history. Shit, don't everybody believe in Google? Go Google that shit. See what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about, man. You know what I dare you to sit up there and say, explain. You know what I'm talking about, man. His fighting people. You know we've been fighting 400 and still fighting to this day. To this day. To this day.
The Lord showed me, and behold, 2 baskets of figs were set before the temple of the Lord. After that, Nebuchadrezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away captive Jeconiah the son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, and the princes of Judah, with the carpenters and smiths from Jerusalem, and had brought them to Babylon. At that time, the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up against Jerusalem, and the city was besieged. And Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came against the city, and his servants did besiege it. And Jehoiachin, the king of Judah, went out to the king of Babylon, he and his mother and his servants, and his princes and his officers. And the king of Babylon took him in the 8th year of his reign. And he carried out thence all the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king's house, and cut in pieces all the vessels of gold which Solomon king of Israel had made in the temple of the Lord, as the Lord had said. And he carried away all Jerusalem, and all the princes, and all the mighty men of valor, even 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and smiths. None remained, save the poorest sort of the people of the land. And he carried away Jehoiachin to Babylon, and the king's mother, and the king's wives, and his officers, and the mighty of the land. Those carried he into captivity from Jerusalem to Babylon.
So we see that the house of Judah was led away captive into Babylon during the time of Nebuchadnezzar. But it was from this waypoint that some of the descendants of the house of Judah will make their way into Spain. But let's go ahead and bring that out. So we're going to be jumping into the scattered nations and get into this history. And it reads, Thomas and King Alfonso's, whence we may learn, if we can believe it, that a king of Spain who had assisted Nebuchadnezzar in reducing Jerusalem brought an enormous population into Spain, all from either the family of David or at least from the tribe of Judah, and that the royal family resided first in Seville, then in Granada, adding that the exiles afterward had their number greatly increasing by the fugitives from the desolation of the second temple. And it goes on to say, the Lord also shall save the tents of Judah, affirms that at the desolation of the first temple, 2 families of the house of David came and settled in Spain, one at Lucina, the other the Barbanels at Seville. And from these came 1,000 offshoots. This he quotes from an earlier author, Isaac ben Gieft. But in the works of the latter, that now remain, there is no such statement to be found. In the 17th century, Manasseh ben Israel, who had married a daughter of the Barbanels, traced their origin in Spain to the Second Temple. Furthermore, we read a chronological work called Sadir Alam in our 3rd or 4th century tells us that the conqueror Aspanesis destroyed the temple and removed many families of the house of David and Judah into Aspima, which is Spain. The same statement was made about the same period to Jerome, only changing the name Aspinius into Adrian and enumerating the families thus banished at 50,000. And the final page reads, at a conference held in Oregon before the anti-pope in 1414, this number was also given by the Jews. Our Barbanels afterwards gave the same number, but divided it into 40,000 families of Judah and 10,000 of Benjamin and the priests. The Septuagint of Judah still later says that the number of Israel brought out of Palestine into Spain at the time exceeded the number of those brought out of Egypt by Moses. So after reviewing all this information, we can obviously see that there was numerous amounts of the family of Judah, or the family of the southern kingdom, throughout Spain. You had descendants of Judah, you had descendants of Benjamin, as well as Levi. Thousands of offshoots that had been transported to Spain after the destruction of the first and second temple. But let's go on and continue and get some more information on these brews in Spain. Yahya bin Rabbi. Yahya bin Rabbi, also known as Yahya the Negro, was a Portuguese nobleman. He was reputed to be a direct descendant of the Hebrew exile archers of ancient Babylon that claimed to be direct descent from the biblical King David, and was the eponymous progenitor of the Ibn Yahya family. I don't know about you all, family, but if someone's called the Negro, they have to be a Negro. But hey, I digress. Let's continue on. And it reads, Don Fernand, his successor, was also attached to his Jewish subjects. Don Judah was the high treasurer of the royal treasury, and Don David Negro was a particular favorite with him. Alright? And next we read, only apparently cogent suggestions included astrologers and physicians attached to the royal court, or the encourage of the royal princes, such as Judah Negro, a member of a family also known as Ibn Yahya. And the last reference reads, Barbanels was not the only Jewish favorite at Alfonso's court. Two brothers, Ibn Yahya Negro, also frequented the court of Lisbon. Alright, so here we have it again. But I know what you're thinking. Just because they had the surname Negro, they didn't mean they was Negroes. But let's bring out some evidence on that. A treatise of physical geography lets us know that. We need go no further of the Jews of southern Spain and compare them with those of Holland and northern Germany to perceive a striking difference. The Spanish Jew is always dark complexion, and his hair is uniformly black. But wait, there's more. Sources of history in the Pentateuch informs us that thus the black color is found not only in individuals as the black Jews of Portugal. So yes, the Jews of Spain and Portugal were black. So now that we have an understanding of who these Judeans were, where they were from, and what color they were, it's time to gain an understanding of the hidden history of the Inquisition and how it plays a role in our history. And to do that, we're going to be jumping to the Jews in Spain of Portugal and the Inquisition. Alright, so let's read. Unfortunately, at the time of the expulsion, the plague was raging in Castile, and the fugitives brought with them the disease, propagating it wherever they went, and not unnaturally causing their advent to be viewed with loathing and horror. Now, during this time was the outbreak of the Black Death, also named after the Black Judeans. As we read, they was the cause, or they was the blame of this outbreak. And we look in the scripture, a curse outlined to the Israelites was that the Lord shall make the pestilence cleave unto them, and that it would be with them wherever they went. So we see this actually being fulfilled during this time. Furthermore, it goes on to say, this circumstance introduced King John to hasten their departure from Portugal, for which purpose ships were duly provided according to the agreement, but such was the temper of the captains and sailors that they subjected the Jews to the hardest possible conditions. They plundered them of their goods and valuables, even to their very clothes, and landed them naked and bare of everything on barren points of the African coast, leaving them to die of starvation or to be sold into slavery to the Moors. Nor was this all. The king wrested from their parents all children between the ages of 3 and 10 of those Jewish immigrants who from poverty or otherwise had omitted to pay the capitation tax on entering, or who were forced to remain in Portugal, and had them transported to the newly discovered islands of St. Thomas, which then swarmed with alligators and other beasts of prey, to be brought up as Christians. 600 of the richest families of the Spanish Jews, however, had by a separate transaction procured for themselves the right of remaining in Portugal on payment of 600,000 gold cruzados, and a few useful merchants were also exempted from the action of the general decree. So this right here is very important, family, because we see that some of the rich Spanish and Portuguese Israelites were able to buy their way out of being sold or sent to West Africa. All right? This is important because we see later on that these same banished Jews were later coming and resettling in the United States and being classified under free Negroes. Furthermore, we read, a fresh edict now went forth that all children between 14 and 20 should also be taken from their parents and baptized, and multitudes were dragged forcibly by their hair and by their arms into the churches and compelled to receive the waters of baptism, together with new names being afterwards given over to those who undertook to instruct them in Catholic faith. Next, the parents themselves were seized and were offered to have their children restored to them if they would consent to be converted. In case of their refusal, they were to be placed in confinement for 3 days without food or drink. It is indeed wonderful that any mortals could be proof against so terrible and fetish an ordeal. Yet to the glory of the Hebrew race, very many still remained moved. Resistance was still, however, not to be tolerated, and it was therefore decreed that the same fate was to be meted out to the adults and to the aged, as had already been the portion of the younger members of the race of Israel. Amid the most heart-rending cries and the most determined resistance, men and women in the flower of their days or the decrepitude of age were dragged into the churches and forcibly baptized amid the mocking and excultation of an excited populace. But 7 or 8 of the whole number of those who maintained their constancy succeeding in eluding force and managed to secure a passage to the coast of Africa. To continue, the Inquisition became a living reality in the whole breadth of the peninsula, and throughout those enormous colonies in America, in Africa, and in Asia, which were subjected to the crowns of Spain and Portugal. But furthermore, we should continue the researching and digging of these brews into Africa. So let's head for the next reference, the history and description of Africa. And it reads, before Ferdinand, the king of Castile, expelled all the Jews out of Spain, after the return of which Jews into Africa. Now, in order for someone to return somewhere, they have to be from there. And with Israel being in Northeast Africa, is even more evident that this source is referring to Africa as their homeland. Now let's jump to America being an accurate description of the New World. And we're going to read right here where it says, that John III, King of Portugal, sent a colony thither above 200 years ago, whom, though the unwholesome air destroyed, yet the place was not left desolate. For he sent new inhabitants, who first settled in Guinea, next in Angola, and lastly on the island St. Thomas, that so they might be the better use to the air. That the said king sold all those Jews for slaves that refused to embrace the Roman religion, and caused their children to be baptized, from whom most of the present inhabitants are descended. So wait. You telling me that most of the people in Angola, St. Thomas, and Guinea are descended of these banished Jews? Was not slaves during the transatlantic slave trade brought from Guinea? Was not the whole 1619 story about slaves from Angola? Let's continue to expound. We're going to jump to the Iberian magazine. And it reads, the discovery of the Gold Coast served indeed yet more to enlarge the sphere of the navigation of the Portuguese than their slave trade, but it forced them also to extend themselves on the coast and to settle colonies in the Congo, Angola, and other places which they had till then neglected. Prince Henry's colonies were enlarged by his successors. King John II in 1491 expelled all the Jews to the island of St. Thomas, which had been discovered in 1471, and to other Portuguese settlements on the continent of Africa. And from these banished Jews, the Black Portuguese, as they are called, and the Jews of Loango, who are despised even by the very Negroes, are descended. By these colonies, St. Thomas soon became a confederate place of trade invaluable for its sugar plantations. So this is when we start to see them being sent down to Brazil, down to the West Indies, down to St. Thomas to work during the early transatlantic slave trade on the sugar plantations. And we see all these sources are overlapping themselves to show these things to be true. We see that the Jews were sent to the Congo, to Angola, to Guinea, to the island of St. Thomas, and to the island of Sao Tome. All right? But let's continue. All right, so we're going to jump to Africa being an accurate description of the regions. And we're going to bring out something extremely important right here. All right? And it reads, many Jews also are scattered over this region, some natives, boasting themselves of Abraham's seed, inhabiting both sides of the river Niger. But let's remember something. The Portuguese arrived at the Niger Delta on the coast in 1473. By the 17th century, coastal trade had supplanted the trans-Saharan trade, mostly dealing in slaves. During the years when the slave trade flourished, nearly half the number of slaves exported from Africa came from the Niger Delta, which came to be known as the Slave Coast. Others are Asian strangers who fled hither, either from the desolation of Jerusalem by Vespasian, or from Judea, wasted and depopulated by the Romans. All right, so remember this here. These Spanish and Portuguese brews came by way to Spain during the time of Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian captivity. So right now we listen off Hebrew Israelites that was already in West Africa before the Inquisition. So you had a whole link up in West Africa of the Jews fleeing from Jerusalem and the Druze fleeing out of Europe. All right, but let's continue on. It continues on to say, depopulated by the Romans, Persians, Saracens, and Christians, or else such as came out of Europe, which they were banished, out of some parts of Italy in the year 1342, out of Spain in the year 1462, out of the Low Countries in 1350, out of France in 1403, out of England in 1422. So we see all these Hebrew Israelites, right, coming and settling in West Africa, or coming and being sent to West Africa. All right, it says these all differ in habit and are divided into several tribes, having no dominion, though both wealthy and numerous, but despised of all nations, and so abominated by the Turks that they are not admitted to be Mohammedans unless first baptized. All right, so we're going to skip down, and it says the idolaters are numerous in Negro land. Where's Negro land? West Africa, Upper and Lower Ethiopia, and towards the Great Ocean, except, as we hinted before, some few who by the industry of the Portuguese and Spaniards have converted and baptized in several places. All right, so let's letting us know that the Portuguese and Spaniards were sending out missionaries to these colonies in Western Africa to convert these Jews, these scattered Jews, into the Roman Christian religion. All right, so in Negro land, West Africa, the same place where the kingdom of Judah is, we have these descendants of these Spanish and Portuguese brews that was sent into Western Africa. Now, mind you, this was during the slave trade. Now, let's get into the so-called early slave trade, or what it really is, the Inquisition. See, they like to lie and hide history, but I'm finna bring it out, because what a lot of people don't know is that the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, is nothing but a continuation of the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisition. All right, the Inquisition led into the slave trade, but let's bring that out. The early transatlantic slave trade, Emperor Charles V, from 1501 until 1518, the transatlantic slave trade was comprised of black slaves transported from Iberia. All right, Iberia is Spain and Portugal. Now, if we look at history and what was going on during this time, we just reviewed that the Spanish Inquisition was going on. That the people of Spain were sending out the Jews to Africa and to parts of the West Indies. All right, but let's continue on. Direct slave traffic from Africa was not initially permitted for the same reasons that colonialists were repeatedly forbidden from bringing enslaved Muslims and Moriscos to the Americas. Now, why was this? Because the Moors, aka Muslims, and the Europeans conspired against us. We just read before that they were sending the brews to the western coast of Africa, or settling them to the Moors, all right, as slaves. But let's continue to break this down. The Spanish crown worried that captives from sub-Saharan Africa might introduce non-Christian religious practices to American Indian populations. Now, what did we just read? That what? They wanted to convert the Jews to what? The Christian religion, because they was not embracing the Christian religion. They sent the Jews to Western Africa, to the southern parts of Africa, in the Congo and the Angola. And that is known as what? Sub-Saharan Africa. So who are we really talking about? The Jews they brought from Sub-Saharan Africa. All right, we know that they was not practicing Christianity, but what? Judaism, their birthright religion. And they was afraid that the influence would branch off onto the American Indians. Even Cambridge University put a publication out stating that Judaism was the religion that the slaves brought over here to the Americas. All right? So what's really going on here? They not telling you your history. Though very little is known of the earliest slave trade to the Americas, I bet not, because this was the Inquisition. The number of slaves transported during these years appeared to have been comparatively minimal, all right, as they say. Furthermore, in 1518, Fernando and Isabella's grandson, Charles V, abolished the provision requiring slaves to be born under Christian dominion and issued a charter allowing 4,000 Africans to be purchased directly from Portuguese traders in Cape Verde Island and transported to the New World. Now, let me read this again. They abolished the provision requiring slaves to be born under Christian dominion. Why was this? Because the slaves they was taking before were now in Africa. So they went after them. The first slave ship, presently known to have sailed with captives directly from Africa to the Americas, embarked from the Cape Verde Islands and Sao Tome, arriving in Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, and Cuba during the mid-1500s. Now we know that the people of Sao Tome were what? Descendants of the Spanish and Portuguese. But we finna jump to this book and bring something out on the people of Cape Verde. Portuguese explorations to the west and the formation of Brazil informs us that by the year 1470, the Portuguese had found the equatorial island of Sao Tome in Guinea Gulf, off the African coast. The climate proved to be extremely wholesome for Europeans, and settlement was slow. The official chronicler of King John II, Garcia de Resende, reports one of the methods to populate this island that also throws some light on the tragic form of Jewish participation in the Portuguese Atlantic Empire. The king had allowed Jewish refugees from Spain, from where they had been expelled in 1492, to remain in Portugal only to return for payment of an enormous ransom. In 1493, those who could not pay had their children taken away from them, baptized by force, and deported to Sao Tome in order to be raised as Christians and to help populate the island that the king had just leased to Alvaro at an annual rent of 100,000 reais. All right, so that's why I say that this is important, because as we see throughout history, that the people of Sao Tome indeed were not Africans, as they say, but actually Jewish deportees, Hebrew Israelite deportees, to populate that island. All right, so let's jump to the next source, and I'm going to show you in plain day how the education system lies to us and hides the truth in plain sight. And the next source reads, in Spain's largest city, Seville, free and enslaved Africans congregated in ethnic enclaves. As their numbers grew, Isabel and Fernandad named one John de Valladolid of noble lineage among Negroes to regulate the city's African community and be its chief and judge. So we see that here in this source, he's described as a so-called African to be in charge of the so-called African community. But here, when we jump over to Wikipedia, this same man is referred to as what? A Jew. Born Jewish, he was converted. He converted to Christianity, as they say. More than likely, he was converted and baptized during the times of the Inquisition. So how did he go from Jew to African? The same way we over here in the United States and went from Jew to African, Israelite to African. Just because throughout history we've been lied to, thinking that the only people in the Bible were black or descendants of Ham. thinking that the only people in Africa are descendants of Ham. No, no, no. But let's continue. Now we're going to jump to review and then the history des religions. Alright? And it reads, the communities of Lima and Cartagena also naturally looked to Seville, but also had a close relationship with the Portuguese enclaves in Africa. A large number of those accused and arrested in the south of the continent arrived from Angola, Guinea, and Sao Tome, where in many cases they had engaged in Jewish practices. So we see here again that brews being sent to the West Indies, specifically right here in this source to Mexico, from Angola, Guinea, and Sao Tome, because they was engaged in Jewish Hebrew Israelite practices, the practices that they brought to that land. It's that simple. Hidden history. Alright? So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up with this section of the video with the untold story. And it informs us that the black Jews went to Portuguese colonial possessions in Western Africa, which were Guinea, San Tome Islands, Senegal, Angola, and a few islands near the African coast. Alright? Throughout their persecution in Portugal, thousands of Jews left the country. The Jews were leaving the country in such massive numbers that in 1489 and 1531, the king published a law forbidding the new Christians, also known as black Jews, from leaving Portugal without special permits. Alright? Cecile Roof wrote that Christian Jews immigrated to the Portuguese colony of Angola in Western Africa were agents of the Inquisition who were sent to ferret them out in 1626. Alright? It is certain that many black Jews of Portugal, San Tome, and Angola who became victims of the Inquisition and Portuguese persecution were sold into the slave trade. This Atlantic slave trade lasted more than 400 years, from 1444 to about 1880 in various parts of South America. Alright, I know we've been digging through a lot of information. So far, we saw that the Jews of Spain and Portugal were indeed sent to the western coast of Africa. And they were indeed Negroes, black. Alright? We saw that they were later picked up into the transatlantic slave trade and sold as slaves, sent to the United States of America and other parts of the Americas, as in the West Indies, Brazil, Mexico, and various places of that sort. Not only that, but that they later, some of them later, met up in Nigeria or around the Niger River with their other brethren that was already there previous to the Inquisition, and they were also sold into the slave trade, alright? So our Hebrew Israelite heritage is evident and it's true. Alright? So now we're about to get into Judah being dispersed to the four corners due to the Inquisition coming out of Spain and Portugal and out of Africa and out of Brazil. Alright? Isaiah 11 and 12. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. The Jews and Moors in Spain lets us know that the New World, the discovery of which Jews and Moors had made possible, poured into the mother country a prodigious wealth, which hastened the ruins of Spain. Spain would have maintained her position as leader in the commercial world, and Italy and France and the Netherlands, the new home of the Jews. Alright, so we see that Italy, France, and the Netherlands became the new home of the Jews. I told you all to remember those Jews that was able to pay the tax, to not to be able to be sent to Africa, because these are these Jews coming out of Portugal and settling in these various countries in Europe. Those that was not sent to Africa. Alright, these was basically the rich brews, okay? They were sent to these European countries, and as we're going to continue to see, some of these Negro Sephardic brews were later coming and resettling in the Americas and being classified as free Negroes, okay? Furthermore, many of the Portuguese Jews settled and became prosperous in the Indies, which is the West Indies, in southern France, and in Hamburg. Others settled in the Netherlands and became especially prosperous in Holland. From Holland, large numbers of the descendants of the Portuguese and Spanish exiles entered England, so they went from there to England through the intercession of Manasseh ben Israel with Oliver Cromwell. And from England and from the Indies and from Italy, they entered the United States. So this verified what I just previously stated. They was all coming from these European nations or these other nations that they were scattered to and coming and settling back in the United States, all right? But let's jump to Jews and Muslims in British colonial America. And it reads, in this work, we present a series of colonial documents, contemporary, first-hand accounts, records, portraits, family genealogies, and ethnic DNA tests, results which fundamentally challenge the national storyline depicting America's first settlers as white, British, and Christian. We postulate that many of the initial colonists were Sephardic, Jewish, and Muslim Moorish ancestry, alright? So we just reviewed this, man. We know that both the Moors and the Jews were black. The source told us that they were selling the Jews to the Moors as slaves. So there you have it. Furthermore, even a particularly New York founded by the Dutch, as New Amsterdam was heavily peopled by Sephardic Jews and Moorish Muslims. Alright. From the references we've read before, we know what? That the Sephardic Jews were black. As we take a look at this and that genealogy tips, it informs us as well that some say that the term Black Dutch refers to the Sephardi Jews who married Dutch Protestants who escaped the Inquisition, many of their descendants later moving to the Americas. The black referring to their dark hair and complexions, alright? So we got black Jews coming in from everywhere, man. Black Jews coming everywhere into the United States just to be classified as Negro or African American, just like their other brethren that was brought here to the United States. Yes, we from Africa, but what nation do we come from? What people do we come from? And let's continue to expound. So let's read from Black Jews in Africa and in the Americas. And it reads from the third highlighted section. William Barrington happened to visit a Sephardi synagogue in Amsterdam, where he commented that the Jews were very dark-skinned and lascivious. They were the most black, alright? So this is important because now we're about to bring out a real live descendant of these Sephardic Jews.
Rabbi Elazar de Mota, here in Dominican Republic, Santo Domingo. We're here at the cemetery where our ancestors that came from Portugal, Amsterdam, and Curacao, where they were buried. This is where all began for us. The first Jew that was buried here, Jacob Pardo, who was a native from...
So now let's jump to Nature Knows No Color Line. And we're going to bring out where it says, so dark were the Jews, especially of Portugal and southern Spain, that many whites thought that all Jews were black or dark. All right, let's jump down. Many of the Jews who were banished from Portugal by John II settled in the West Indies. John Bigelow, who visited Jamaica in 1850, saw the descendants and says they were Negroid. Come on now. But here go a real live descendant right here.
And your name?
My name is Miss Hannah Diana Levy, third. I am the great-granddaughter of first Hannah Glaze and the second granddaughter of first Hannah Watson. My mother is Leonie Levy. She married the son of Uriah Augustus Levy, James Roy Levy, and my great-grandfather is John Alberta Watson from Scotland, Dundee. They came to live in Jamaica. They were producers who produce crops and send it back to Scotland and Israel. I live in Mount Peace, Lucy, Hanover. And my brother is Joshua Michael Levy, Percival Levy. We are from the tribe of Levites, and we represent the biblical, the Bible. I would like to contact the Jewish people. I'm 43 years now and I've never met the Jewish nation.
Something else to note from this, it says the Eastern Jews who settled in Austria, Poland, and Russia were Negroid too. All right? Count Adam Gorowski of Poland, who visited the United States in 1857, said the Jews of his country strongly resemble American mulattoes. All right? This is because some of our Sephardic brethren were mixing and mingling with the Gentile nations. And I have proof of that. And to do that, we're going to jump to Fireman's Magazine. All right? And it tells us, I heard a fact or two about Judah P. Benjamin's early life the other day, which were new to me. His father was a small, dark-skinned Spanish Jew. All right? I told you all, the Spanish Jews and the Portuguese Jews were always dark complexion. No matter where they went, this is facts. No matter what you see today, no matter how many people don't hijack our brethren, no matter how many people don't hijack our ancestors' heritage, all right? And this was what? Who kept a little fruit shop on Market Street, Charleston, South Carolina. So this brother was in Charleston, South Carolina. But let's continue to read. Go to the second paragraph. It says, both Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin were devout adulterers to the grand old religion of their fathers, and Judah P. Benjamin was educated. He was always retained his respect for his race, although he married a Gentile. So like I said, man, we got the brother Judah P. Benjamin here. Although he respected his race, as they say, he still married a Gentile. But let's continue. This is coming from Florida International University of Israel's Seed, okay? And it tells us that in addition to books that discuss the presence of Jews in Africa, the African Americans could have also heard about black Jews in America or even seen them. Grenium Berger wrote about the sighting of a black Jew in the United States in the 17th century. In the course of time, an occasional Jew did settle in Boston and was apparently unmolested. One such resident named Solomon had the bad judgment to travel towards New Hampshire on a Sunday in 1668. The next page goes on to say, Solomon is described as a mulatto Jew. All right, we know that mulattoes are both mixed of black and white. All right, most of the time Jew and Gentile, as we just read with the reference of Judah P. Benjamin. But let's continue. The first Jew living in New England, as far as we know, was of Negro descent. All right, It goes on to say, writing about a black Jewish woman when slavery was still going on, Granium Berger remarked, "It is not known whether Lucy Marks, a member of the congregation Maked Israel, was the descendant of one of the black Jews who came up from the lands, or was a former slave of Rachel Marks." All right, that's what they always try to do when someone claims to be a Jew. They automatically go to the white Jewish slave masters. But what we're going to go to find out throughout this presentation is they stole our identity. Plain and simple. So next, this is coming from the website Moors in America. And it says, in 1786, two men appeared in Charleston, dressed in the Moorish habit, in which arose a great deal of suspicion by their strange ways. An officer of the law tried to question them, found out that they were Moors and did not speak English. According to Charles' book, The Jews of Charleston, concluded after some time passed, they determined that the two of them were of the Jewish nation. All right, so these so-called Moors that they had in America, or that was over here in America, were actually of the Jewish nation, because like I said, some of the Jews teamed up with the Moors over there in Spain. But let's continue to read. They took the two men to the home of a woman on the East Bay Street who understood their language. She found out that they sailed from Algeria to Virginia, where they had been arrested on suspicion of being Algerian. They traveled overland to South Carolina. The woman's name was Miss Starr Barrett, a Jewish woman who was born in the Barbary States. Like I said, it's Hebrew Israelites all in America, and we don't know our history whatsoever. A Jewish woman from the Barbary States. The Barbary States is northwestern Africa, okay? But let's continue on to the next thing. Now we're going to be getting into the Jews of Philadelphia, their history from the earliest settlements, all right? And it says, a party of 27 Hebrews set sail for a port in Venice of Bahia, bound for what was then called New Amsterdam, which is now New York City. All right, remember from the previous sources, we just found that the earliest Jew in New Amsterdam was of Negro descent, okay? And this was in the year 1654, and is the first actual record of a Jewish settlement in these parts that has come to light. Furthermore, Hebrews becoming discouraged by reason of this conduct towards them repaired to Newport, Rhode Island, about 1657, where more freedom was granted. And here others came in 1694 from Curaçao in the West Indies. The first Jewish congregation established in the United States appeared to have been Sharif Israel, remnant of Israel, in New York City in 1680. It is to this day one of the largest and most influential Jewish bodies in the land, counting among its members descendants of Spanish and Portuguese Israelites who founded it. Remember, once again, family, the Spanish and Portuguese Jews are Negroes, all right? But let's continue on to read. And it says, in the evening, in company with Mr. Lewis and Mr. Littlepage, I went to Mr. Levy, a Jew and very considerable merchant. He was a widower, and his sister, Mrs. Hetty Levy, kept his house. We stayed tea and was very agreeable entertained by the young lady. She was of a middle stature and very well made, her complexion black but comely. Doesn't that sound like scripture with the black Shulamite woman? All right. She had two charming eyes, full of fire and rolling. Eyes brown, black, and well turned, with a beautiful head of hair, coal black, which she bore a wig. Okay, so we keep seeing references of black Jews, all right, Spanish and Portuguese Jews in the United States. But let's bring out some more information from the Jews of South Carolina. And it reads, Georgetown is the second oldest Jewish community in South Carolina. Jews have certainly lived here since 1762. They probably lived here before this date. The records of Georgetown prior to the war are unfortunately destroyed. The earliest settlers, as far as our present information goes, were the families of Cohen and Myers. Okay, so now what we're about to do is take a look at a Cohen descendant of today. And guess what, family? They're Negro, or so-called Afro-American.
Hi, my name is Sadie Day Pasha, and I'm a Cohen descendant of the Cohens of Georgetown County, South Carolina. My mother, who grew up in Georgetown County, South Carolina, was born 1927, was taught the tradition of Passover, lighting candles on the Sabbath, by her grandfather, Richard Smith, who was the son of Grace Cohen. She taught these traditions to myself.
And now we're going to finish off reading from this reference. When reading, it says, ever since the expulsion from Iberia, the Sephardim, Spanish and Portuguese Jews, have been the pioneers in establishing settlements and rearing congregations in Israel, in whatever place they have set foot. And this city constitutes no exception. True, there may have been a few representatives of the Ashkenazim, German, Polish, and other Jews among the numbers, as names would seem to show, though of these the majority were Englishmen or Americans. Alright, so we're starting to see that these Ashkenazi Jews are starting to appear with us, or when we show up to the Americas. Next, the Georgia Historical Quarterly tells us, anyone who gains his knowledge of early Georgia history from oral sources will soon learn that the original Jewish settlers were reputed to be clearly divided into two camps, the Sephardim from Portugal and the Ashkenazim from Central Europe. Furthermore, at the bottom, it lets us know that in the state of Georgia, that the German and Portuguese Jews were arriving there independently, separate from one another, okay? Next we read, it is not surprising, therefore, that the journey lasted 5 months, which was not unheard of for a 18th century ocean voyage. The delay in the Thames may have lasted for some time without detection. Every effort being made to keep the illegal immigration secret. During the long and oppressive voyage, there must have been some friction between the very strict Ashkenazim and the more secular Sephardim. So we see that these Ashkenazis were following us over here. But let me continue to build this case. Goodman stated that Benjamin Shiftal kept his journal in Hebrew, although that it is what he told his son Levi, it is more likely that he kept it in Yiddish, the German dialect spoken by most Ashkenazim and written in Hebrew characters. This is to be expected, since Yiddish was the living language of the Ashkenazim and was even the language of instruction in London at the time. But y'all expect these people to be the true, authentic black Israelites? But let me show you some more. Meanwhile, the first batch of settlers under Oglethorpe had hardly reached the Savannah River when an unexpected vessel arrived with 40 Jews on board. This company consisted of people of two descriptions. The one, for the most part, Sephardim, black Jew, came out as ordinary colonists at their own expense. The second comprised assisted Ashkenazi immigrants. So here we have it again. These people coming and settling amongst us. Alright, in the later years, they overtook our identity. And I'm going to show you how. So when looking at this chart, we see the Sephardic period coming in between the 17 and 1800s. During this time, was the same time that the Brews were running away from the Inquisition, those who were not already sent to Africa and sold as slaves already. All right, so it was coming over here to the Americas. As we see the influx or the high immigration of these European Jews into the United States over the years without Sephardic immigration. Why is this? It was a conspiracy against the house of Judah. Sephardim in the Americas lets us know that research in American Jewish history has shown that the first significant Jewish immigrants to America and to the Western Hemisphere were Jews from the West Indies and Europe who traced their ancestry to the Jewish communities in Spain and Portugal. We've already proven who these people were. The Spanish Portuguese Sephardim dominated the religious, social, and economic life of American Jewry and the Jewry of the Western Hemisphere during the colonial and early federal periods. Despite the growing numerical superiority of the Ashkenazim, already evident in the third decade of the 18th century. Listen up, people. The growing numerical superiority of the Ashkenazim, already evident in the third decade of the 18th century. By the early 1830s, however, the Sephardim were overwhelmed numerically by a flood of Jewish immigrants from German-speaking Central Europe. These German Jews soon developed much of the institutional framework that would serve as the foundation for a future American Jewish community. So that was the purpose of bringing these European Jewish converts into the United States to overtake the identity of the true Negro Sephardim Brews. So what do you think was going to happen to the free Jewish Negroes? They already had wiped out the identity of their Jewish Negro brethren that was enslaved on the United States. That was the whole point of bringing these European immigrants in, to destroy the true identity of the American Negro. Furthermore, the first American Sephardim soon became part of American Jewish myth. They were viewed as the grandees of the American Jewish society. They constituted an autocratic groups that has now all but vanished as a factor in the American Jewish community of the 20th century. Yet the Sephardic community continued to carry a certain mystique that led Ashkenazim to join and even to take over Sephardic congregations and to claim Sephardic origins. Oh man, do you see this crap, man? Everybody want to be an Israelite until it's time to live out those curses. Everybody want to be an Israelite until it's time to deal with those curses. We the only ones that endured it. Furthermore, we see that these so-called Ashkenazi German converts had the intentions to take over our congregations, which led to our origins and heritage being claimed by Europeans. To finish this up, we're going to be jumping to the black Jews of Africa and the Americas. And it tells us that the idea that the Jews were black persisted into the 19th century. All right. So right around this time that these Europeans were immigrating to the same places these Spanish and Portuguese, these Negro Spanish and Portuguese, as I may rephrase it, is around the same time the color of the Jews changed. Now, isn't that interesting? So now we coming to an end, but I want to bring out a verse that's really important to the descendants of Judah scattered to the four corners of the earth, because this was set forth by the Most High. And when we look at this scripture, you will understand what I'm saying.
Thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, like these good figs, so will I acknowledge them that are carried away captive of Judah, whom I have sent out of this place into the land of Chaldeans for their good. For I will set mine eyes upon them for good, and I will bring them again to this land, and I will build them and not pull them down, and I will plant them and not pluck them up. And I will give them an heart to know me, that I am the Lord, and they shall be my people, and I will be their God, for they shall return unto me with their whole heart.
So, family, where is Chaldea? That's right, Babylon. We distract the house of Judah, the southern kingdom, from Babylon to the four corners. We see that after their expulsion from Spain and Portugal, some went off into other European countries, later making their way into the United States and other parts of the Americas, while others were sent to the western coast of Africa and later sold as slaves in the transatlantic slave trade, family. So they know who we are. They took our identity, but it was prophesied.
O Lord, my strength and my fortress and my refuge in the day of affliction, the Gentiles shall come unto thee from the ends of the earth, and shall say, Surely our fathers have inherited lies, vanity, and things wherein there is no profit.
You know we the real Jews? Ah, that's good then. Since you know that, but y'all fake though, man. Y'all gotta get right, man. We the real Jews out here. We the real Jews. We the real Jews. We the children of God. We the children of Israel. We the Israelites, not a Jew. I just gotta let it be known. Let God be true and every man a liar.
And with that, I say shalom and Todah for all that watched and tuned in today. Make sure you stay prayed up. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment on the page. And pass this video along so this knowledge can continue to be spread to the masses of Judah, spread it across the four corners of the earth.